would begin with betrayal from her own children. At 68, she had weathered storms larger than most tight finances in the early years of marriage, the painful loss of her husband Edward, and the heavy silence of a house that once overflowed with laughter. Yet nothing compared to the moment she lay in bed, half paralyzed from a stroke, and heard voices just outside her door. The door was slightly ajar, and her 3 children thought she was unconscious, incapable of understanding. Stephen, the eldest and a polished financial advisor, spoke first, his voice sharp and practical. The beach house should fetch at least $2 million in this market, he calculated aloud. Caroline, always ambitious, chimed in with her interest in the sapphire jewelry set Edward had given Patricia for their 30th anniversary. Mark, the youngest and most impressionable, mentioned that a buyer was already waiting to review their mother's art collection. Patricia's heart clenched. To them, her life had been reduced to assets on a spreadsheet. The beach house, her sanctuary in Santa Barbara, where sunsets had painted the sky during long evenings with Edward, was being treated like a quick sale on a balance sheet. She wanted to shout that she was still here, still alive, but her body refused to respond. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting the monitors. She glanced at Patricia and then toward the hallway. "Your children are still here, Mrs. Langford," she said softly. "Do you want me to tell them you are showing improvement?" With the slightest shake of her head, Patricia refused. The nurse leaned closer, whispering words that pierced the silence. "You can hear them, can't you? Families often get ahead of themselves." Patricia closed her eyes again. They thought she was finished, but she was not. She would not only survive this, she would fight back in a way none of them expected, and that fight would begin with a secret about the beach house they were so eager to sell. Patricia woke the next morning to the sterile white ceiling of her hospital room and the steady rhythm of machines that had become her only company. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was clear, sharper than her children realized. She remembered the crushing pain in her chest, the way the world had tilted before everything went dark, and now the fragments of whispered conversations still echoed in her ears. They thought she was gone, or worse, too weak to resist them. They were wrong. Her thoughts drifted to the beach house. It was not just real estate, not a number on Stephen's financial charts. It was where Edward had taught their children to swim, where bonfires burned on cool summer nights, where their grandchildren once built sandcastles with sticky fingers and bright laughter. To Patricia, it was a living piece of family history, and more importantly, it held a promise Edward had asked her to keep, a promise none of her children knew about. She tried to lift her arm, and though it moved only slightly, the small twitch filled her with determination. The nurse, Kelly, entered then, cheerful and efficient. She adjusted Patricia's IV and gave her an encouraging smile. "You're stronger today," she said softly. "Your doctor will be pleased, he says you're a fighter." Patricia blinked once, slowly, a silent agreement. Fighter. Yes, she had always been one. When Edward grew sick, it was Patricia who balanced the books, stretched every dollar, and made impossible choices to keep the household afloat. She had survived grief, loneliness, and hardship. Why should a stroke, or even betrayal by her children, defeat her now? The door opened again and Stephen stepped in, his expression rehearsed in sympathy. "Any change?" he asked the nurse, his tone dripping with false concern. Kelly answered calmly, "Your mother's condition is stabilizing. Recovery takes time, but there are positive signs." Stephen nodded solemnly, then turned to Patricia with a look that was more calculation than love. "Don't worry, Mom," he said smoothly. "We're handling everything, just as Dad would have wanted." Inside, Patricia's anger burned. Edward had trusted her with the practical matters of their life, not Stephen. She had promised him that some things were sacred, things her children would never understand. Now, lying silently in her hospital bed, Patricia vowed that her children would learn just how strong she still was. 3 days passed, and with each sunrise Patricia forced her body to obey her will. Her fingers twitched, her lips began to form sounds, and the fog around her thoughts cleared. By the 3rd morning, when the therapist gently asked her to try speaking, Patricia gathered every ounce of strength she had. Her voice was raspy, but the words came through. "I need to make a call." The therapist froze, startled by the clarity of the sentence. Those 5 words marked the beginning of her quiet rebellion. Not a call to Stephen or Caroline, not even to Mark. No, the person she needed was Harold Pierce, the family's lawyer and an old friend who had guided her and Edward through estate planning decades earlier. She had memorized his number long ago. When the hospital phone was finally placed by her ear, Patricia rasped the digits one by one, until the line connected. "Patricia." Harold's voice carried both surprise and relief. "I heard you were unresponsive. Are you all right?" "Better," she whispered. "Need help. Emergency." Patiently, Harold listened as she explained that her children were already pushing to sell the Santa Barbara beach house, convinced she would never recover. Harold was quiet for a moment before asking, "Do they know the truth?" Patricia closed her eyes. "No, they don't." The truth was that the beach house hadn't legally belonged to her for nearly a decade. After Edward's first cancer diagnosis, they had decided together to transfer the property to Michael Grant, the son of Patricia's dearest friend, Linda. Linda had passed away from cancer, leaving Michael with little family and a mountain of educational expenses. Edward had said it best, "We can give him security without taking anything away from us." So, with carefully drafted documents, the beach house became Michael's, though Patricia and Edward retained lifetime usage rights. Their own children never knew, and Patricia had kept the secret all these years. It was her promise to Linda and Edward's final wish. Now, as her children circled like vultures, Patricia knew the secret would soon come to light. She instructed Harold to prepare to block any unauthorized sale attempts and to contact Michael immediately. "Tell him," she said with effort, "it's time." When the call ended, Patricia felt drained but triumphant. For the first time since her stroke, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. She had made her first move, and the game was only beginning. That evening, Patricia received an unexpected visitor. Emily Langford, Caroline's 20-year-old daughter, slipped quietly into the hospital room, holding a small paper bag. Her eyes carried the mixture of worry and defiance that only young people possessed. "Grandma," she whispered, "I brought you something from the cafe downstairs. It's not much, but I thought you'd like real food instead of hospital trays." Patricia managed a faint smile. Emily placed the bag on the table and leaned close. "I know what they're doing," she said, voice trembling. "Mom, Uncle Stephen, even Uncle Mark, they're already selling things. They've emptied the apartment in the city. I overheard Mom talking about putting the beach house on the market, too." Patricia's pulse quickened. She had suspected it, but hearing the words from Emily stung more deeply than she expected. "How do you feel about it?" she asked slowly, her voice still weak. Emily's jaw tightened. "It's wrong. That house is part of you and Grandpa. It's not theirs to sell like furniture." Patricia studied her granddaughter, seeing in her the glimmer of conscience her own children had misplaced. Emily had always been different, sensitive, thoughtful, unwilling to follow the family's obsession with wealth. "I need your help," Patricia whispered. She gestured toward the nightstand where a small flip phone lay hidden, placed there earlier by Nurse Kelly at her request. "This is our line. Only you and I will use it. When I call, you answer. And if you see or hear anything about the house, you tell me first." Emily nodded eagerly, her eyes bright. "I'll do it. Whatever you need, Grandma." Patricia squeezed her granddaughter's hand with surprising strength. "You're braver than your mother knows." For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. She was not entirely alone in this fight. She had Harold, she would soon have Michael, and now she had Emily, her unexpected ally from within the family. As Emily left that night, Patricia closed her eyes and let the plan take shape in her mind. Her children believed she was powerless, a relic waiting to fade. But with allies beside her, Patricia Langford was preparing to remind them that some legacies could never be stolen. 3 days later, the hospital room filled with the quiet shuffle of footsteps. Patricia turned her head and saw a tall young man step inside, carrying a leather satchel and wearing the tired look of someone who had been traveling all night. His eyes softened when they met hers. "Mrs. Langford," he said gently, "it's Michael. Michael Grant." Her heart swelled. Linda's boy, now a man, stood before her, every bit of his mother's kindness etched into his face. Patricia motioned for him to come closer. He took her hand and she whispered, "You came." "Of course," Michael replied. "Mr. Pierce told me everything. I didn't know they were trying to sell the house already." Before Patricia could answer, the door burst open. Stephen strode in, followed by Caroline and Mark. They froze at the sight of Michael sitting by their mother's bed. "Who are you?" Stephen demanded, his voice edged with suspicion. Michael stood, calm but firm. "Michael Grant. I'm the legal owner of the Santa Barbara property you're so eager to sell." The room went still. Caroline's eyes narrowed. "That's ridiculous. That house belongs to our family." Patricia summoned her strength. "No," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Your father and I signed it over years ago. We promised Linda Michael's mother that her son would always have a place to call home. Mark blinked in confusion. Wait, what? You gave away the beach house? Yes, Patricia said. It was Edward's idea as much as mine. He believed wealth without purpose corrupts. That house was never meant to be fought over like a carcass. It was meant to honor friendship and provide security for Michael. Stephen's face turned crimson. You're not thinking clearly, Mom. The stroke this is manipulation. He's taking advantage of you. Michael reached calmly into his satchel and placed a folder on the bedside table. These are the deeds, signed, notarized, and filed nearly 8 years ago. Your father's signature is on every page. Caroline snatched the folder, flipping through the documents with growing frustration. The stamps and signatures left no room for doubt. Mark rubbed his temples, whispering, I can't believe this. Patricia looked at each of them in turn. Believe it. For once, stop seeing me as a bank account and start remembering that I am your mother. This was our decision made out of love and principle. Caroline hissed, so what's left for us then? Nothing? Patricia's voice cut like steel. You still have me. And if you're wise enough, you'll realize that's worth more than any house. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the machines. For the first time since Edward's death, Patricia felt in control again. She had spoken the truth, unveiled the secret, and planted the first seeds of reckoning. Her children could rage all they wanted, but the battle for her legacy had only just begun. The following weekend, Patricia insisted on leaving the hospital for a few hours. Nurse Kelly arranged a wheelchair and Emily accompanied her grandmother with quiet determination. Michael followed close behind, carrying a folder of documents in case they were needed. They drove across town to an upscale auction house where Stephen and Caroline had organized what they called an estate sale. Patricia's heart pounded as they entered the grand hall, filled with glass cases, velvet ropes, and strangers examining the intimate remnants of her life. Jewelry glittered beneath bright lights. Family photographs, stripped from their frames, lay stacked on a side table. Even Edward's old chess set, the one he used to play with Mark every Sunday afternoon, was positioned like a novelty piece to be sold. Patricia's throat tightened. These were not things, they were memories, chapters of a life lived with love and sacrifice, and her children were trading them away for profit. Caroline appeared first, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking against the polished floor. When she saw Patricia, her expression faltered. Mother, you shouldn't be here, she said quickly, her voice low but sharp. This environment is too stressful for your recovery. Patricia's gaze did not waver. Stressful, she asked. Watching strangers haggle over my memories is more than stressful, it's heartbreaking. Stephen joined them, his face set in stone. Mom, please. This is necessary. We can't maintain everything you and Dad accumulated. The house, the jewelry, the art, it's better this way. Patricia shook her head slowly. Better for whom? Certainly not for your father's memory. Certainly not for me. Emily stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. How could you sell Grandpa's chess set? You know what it meant to him and to Mark. Mark appeared at that moment, clearly conflicted. I told them not to include it, he muttered, but no one listened. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness but of fury and resolve. She turned to the strangers gathered nearby, who had paused to watch the confrontation. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice trembling but strong, these items are not for sale. They were never meant to be sold. They are the fabric of a family, and no one, not even my children, has the right to auction off a living woman's life. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Caroline hissed under her breath, You're humiliating us. No, Patricia replied, her tone sharp as a blade. You are humiliating yourselves. She reached for Michael's hand. Together they began removing the tags from several key items. The auctioneer hesitated, then turned uncertainly to Stephen. The tension in the room was palpable. Patricia straightened in her chair, her eyes blazing. Enjoy your sale, she said coldly. Everything has a price, even lessons. Then, with Emily pushing her chair and Michael gathering the documents, Patricia left the hall. Behind her, her children stood frozen, their carefully constructed plan crumbling under the weight of their mother's defiance. The fallout from the failed estate sale was immediate. By Monday morning, Patricia's phone, her private flip phone, buzzed with a call from Harold Pierce. His voice was calm but carried urgency. Patricia, your children have filed a petition to gain conservatorship over your estate. They're claiming you're no longer fit to manage your own affairs. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, So this was their next move. Then we fight, she said firmly. 2 days later, the Langford family gathered in a downtown courtroom. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Stephen stood at the plaintiff's table, his suit immaculate, his arguments polished. Caroline sat beside him, chin lifted high, while Mark fidgeted nervously. On the other side sat Patricia, flanked by Harold and Michael. Emily sat quietly in the back row, her eyes never leaving her grandmother. Stephen opened with carefully chosen words. Your Honor, we love our mother, but her recent stroke has impaired her judgment. We fear she is being manipulated by outside parties with interests contrary to her own. He shot a pointed glance at Michael. Harold rose smoothly when it was their turn. Your Honor, what my colleagues conveniently omit is that Miss Langford is of sound mind and can speak for herself. She is here today not as a victim, but as a woman determined to protect her legacy. The judge turned to Patricia. Mrs. Langford, are you able to testify? With effort, Patricia stood. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she steadied herself on the railing. Her voice, though raspy, carried the strength of decades. I am not incapacitated. I understand fully what is happening. My children are not protecting me, they are protecting their own greed. The Santa Barbara property does not belong to me. It belongs to Dr. Michael Grant, and has for years. My late husband and I made that decision together for reasons that honored a promise and a friendship. She paused, her gaze sweeping over her children. My estate is not a pile of assets to be divided while I'm still alive. It is the story of my life, the sacrifices your father and I made, and the values we tried to teach you. If you've forgotten that, then shame on you. The judge leaned back, considering. Stephen and Caroline looked visibly shaken, while Mark stared at the floor. Harold placed a reassuring hand on Patricia's arm as she returned to her seat. The legal battle was far from over, but in that moment, Patricia had reclaimed her voice and with it, her power. Weeks passed as the legal proceedings dragged on. Patricia attended every hearing, her presence a quiet but unshakable reminder that she was not the frail figure her children hoped to portray. Each time she walked into the courtroom with Harold and Michael by her side, Stephen's polished arguments seemed to lose a little of their shine. But the true breaking point came not in court, but at a family gathering. Harold suggested. If this is really about family, then let's put everything on the table, he told the judge. The idea was simple. Bring everyone together in one room and give Patricia the chance to address her children, without legal jargon clouding the truth. The meeting took place in Harold's office, a space lined with shelves of old law books and framed photographs. Patricia arrived in a wheelchair this time, her energy reserved, but her eyes burned with determination. Emily wheeled her close to the center of the room. Stephen, Caroline, and Mark sat across the table, their postures tense. Patricia wasted no time. I raised you with the belief that family was sacred, that no matter how hard life became, we had each other. And yet when I was at my weakest, you saw me as a ledger to be balanced. Stephen scoffed, leaning back in his chair. You're exaggerating. We were trying to manage things responsibly. Caroline crossed her arms. And how responsible was it to give away the beach house without telling us? That was our inheritance, Mother. Patricia's voice cut through the room. It was never yours to claim. Your father and I made a choice out of love and loyalty to honor Linda and help her son. That house was a symbol of friendship and sacrifice, not a prize to be fought over. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know. I went along because I thought that's what we were supposed to do. Patricia softened slightly toward her youngest. Mark, ignorance is not an excuse. You had a choice to ask questions, to stand for what was right. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Emily spoke up, her young voice trembling but clear. You talk about inheritance, but what about values? Grandma taught me that love is worth more than money. Maybe that's the real inheritance you've all forgotten. Caroline's face flushed, Stephen's jaw tightened, and Mark's eyes filled with tears. The truth had been laid bare, not by Patricia this time, but by the granddaughter they had overlooked. Patricia leaned forward, her voice steady. This is your chance to change. To decide if you want to be remembered as children who betrayed their mother, or as children who found their way back before it was too late. The room was still. For the first time, none of her children had an immediate answer. The breaking point had been reached. Their choices from this moment forward would define the rest of their lives. The final hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Patricia dressed carefully with Emily's help, choosing a simple navy dress and the pearl necklace Edward had given her on their wedding day. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. She wanted her children, the judge, and everyone else present to see her not as a frail patient, but as a woman of dignity and strength. The courtroom was packed. Stephen and Caroline sat with their attorneys, whispering furiously as documents shuffled across the table. Mark lingered behind them, visibly torn, his eyes darting often toward Patricia. At her side were Harold, Michael, and Emily, her allies, her family in the truest sense of the word. When the judge called the session to order, Harold presented the final stack of evidence. Your Honor, the deeds to the Santa Barbara property clearly show ownership was transferred to Dr. Michael Grant nearly 8 years ago, signed by both Edward and Patricia Langford. This claim is indisputable. The judge flipped through the papers, then nodded. Agreed. That property is not part of the estate in question. A murmur swept the courtroom. Caroline stiffened, her nails digging into the table. Stephen's expression faltered for the first time. Harold continued. As for Mrs. Langford's competency, we have multiple medical evaluations confirming she is of sound mind. She has demonstrated clarity, decision-making ability, and determination throughout these proceedings. The judge turned toward Patricia. Miss Langford, do you wish to address the court before I render my decision? Patricia rose slowly, with Emily's steadying hand. She faced her children, her voice firm though age and illness had tried to weaken it. I am not your burden. I am not your bank account. I am your mother. I spent my life teaching you that integrity and love matter more than wealth. If you choose not to carry that forward, then that is your shame, not mine. She paused, her gaze lingering on Mark, whose eyes brimmed with regret. But it is not too late to change. Not for any of you. What you do next will define more than your inheritance, it will define your legacy. The judge delivered the ruling. The petition for conservatorship was denied. Patricia retained full authority over her estate. The gavel struck. The case was closed. Stephen stormed out, his pride more wounded than his plans. Caroline followed, her silence sharp with bitterness. Mark remained, hesitating at the door. He turned back toward his mother. I'm sorry, he whispered, and for the first time in years, Patricia believed he meant it. As the courtroom emptied, Emily hugged her tightly, whispering, You won, Grandma. Patricia smiled faintly. No, Emily, we didn't win money or property. We won something far greater, the truth, and the truth will outlive us all. Months later, Patricia sat on the veranda of her smaller home, the soft ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and lavender. Though she no longer owned the Santa Barbara beach house, she didn't feel its absence. The memories of Edward and their life together lived within her, not within walls or land deeds. Michael had promised she was welcome any time, and Patricia knew Edward would have smiled at the way their promise to Linda had been honored. Emily visited often, bringing her textbooks and youthful energy, filling the quiet house with laughter once again. Mark, slowly rebuilding his relationship with his mother, called every week. He had even asked to join Harold for financial advice, hoping to learn how to rebuild his life without shortcuts. Patricia saw this as the first spark of real growth. Stephen and Caroline remained distant, their pride still too large to bend. Patricia grieved the distance, but she also accepted it. Some lessons take a lifetime to sink in, and she no longer carried the burden of changing them. She had given them truth, what they did with it was their choice. One evening, as Emily brewed tea, Patricia reflected on the journey aloud. People think legacies are about money, houses, jewelry. But those things crumble. What lasts are the values we pass on, the courage to stand up for what's right, the strength to protect what matters, the wisdom to love even when it's not returned. Emily nodded softly. That's the inheritance I want, Grandma. Patricia smiled, her eyes glistening. Then I have already succeeded. The stroke had nearly silenced her, but instead, it had given her a new voice, one sharper, wiser, and freer than ever before. She had faced betrayal, greed, and loss, yet she had emerged not as a victim but as a survivor who carried forward dignity and love. To anyone listening, Patricia's story held a timeless truth. Money may tempt, power may divide, but integrity endures. And in the end, it is the only legacy worth fighting for. As the sun set over the horizon, Patricia lifted her teacup, a quiet toast to Edward,